On September 18, 2001, Dennis Town Meeting adopted Section 4.9 of the Dennis zoning bylaw, becoming one of the first towns behind larger communities like Cambridge and Boston in the state to have a comprehensive affordable housing bylaw. On the Cape, only Barnstable had taken steps to address affordable housing, but at the time that was limited to an amnesty program involving illegal apartments. Since September 2001, many towns have followed our lead in drafting their own affordable housing bylaws. Until recently, the breadth and scope of these bylaws had not been addressed in any legal appellate settings. In February 2010, in the case of Davenport versus the Town of Dennis, we got this legal interpretation. The Massachusetts Appellate Court upheld the ability of a town to create zoning provisions to promote affordable housing. However, the court ruled that the various provisions in the bylaw did not adequately identify the levels of relief the planning board was authorized to provide. In the decision, the appellate court has directed the town to modify Section 4.9 of the zoning bylaw to properly identify the areas the planning board can provide zoning relief. The majority of the changes in Section 4.9 are being brought forward to match the zoning bylaw to the relief of the zoning bylaw study committee and planning board originally thought was provided in it. Defining apartment was not one of the court directives. The Zoning Bylaw Study Committee, while discussing the history of the bylaw and projects that have come to the town, realized that the standard definition of apartment was not so standard. The feeling was that the town should address this head-on and place its own definition into the bylaw to ensure that everyone is on the same page when discussing apartment-type development. The court case involved a municipally sponsored project. However, some of the issues identified in the court case are repeated in other sections of the zoning bylaw. The Zoning Bylaw Study Committee felt that it was important to address the issues the court ruled on in every location it is found in the bylaw. In Section 4.2.1, the use is not specifically identified as being allowed only upon the grant of a special permit. While this is pointed out in other sections of the bylaw, it was thought to be important to specifically point out the special permit requirement. More significantly are the changes found in Section 4.9.2.2. In this section, we had crafted the bylaw with the intent of allowing the planning board to relax all the provisions in the intensity of use schedule. The Superior Court decision read the bylaw in the same fashion as the planning board when it ruled on the initial appeal. The appellate court felt that this was too vague. The appellate court also felt that any relaxation of the intensity of use provisions may be considered to be overruled for multiple structures on a lot by other provisions of Section 2.3 of the bylaw. The changes being proposed here and in the municipally sponsored projects section are intended to clearly address that the planning board can consider relief for all of Section 2.3, 3.1, and 4.2 as these sections relate to particular types of housing. The changes are consistent with how the planning board has currently interpreted the bylaw. We're also establishing some minimum standards which projects must adhere to. These minimums will provide more guidance to the planning board, applicants, and abutters when thinking about what performance guidelines a site must meet. Dennis has one project underway under this section of the zoning bylaw. 12 units of ownership housing has been approved off of Center Street, with 3 of the units permanently deed restricted affordable. I should note that the changes of Section 4.9.2.3.1 relative to minimum upland area did not come from the court case, but rather due to questions surrounding a project that was contemplated but never applied for. Again, one of those instances where it was felt that it was important to clearly state the relationship between this section of the zoning bylaw and other sections. The changes to the municipally sponsored projects section are similar to those discussed above. A couple of the changes should be highlighted, however. Municipally sponsored projects receive the greatest level of zoning relief. In exchange, we seek the greatest levels of affordability. The process for bringing a project of this type to the planning board involves first a stop at the Board of Selectmen. The zoning bylaw is being proposed to be changed to specifically identify that the Board of Selectmen must take a vote on the project before it goes to the planning board. Not a court directive, but an important clarification. The town has seen several municipally sponsored projects come forward. One issue that has arisen has been the ability of these projects to function with the levels of affordability restrictions we place on these projects. In fact, one project had difficulty in selling one unit that was restricted to the 120% of median income. The 80% of median income units sold quite quickly. The Zoning Bylaw Study Committee took this issue under advisement and have recommended that this section be modified. We would continue to hold that half the units must be deed restricted to the 80% of median income. We would allow more flexibility on the remaining units, lowering the requirements that units be restricted to households earning more than 120% of median income to only 25% of the units in the project. The municipally sponsored housing section of the bylaw has been used for new construction projects. It has created small projects and not so small projects. However, nothing under this bylaw is a scale of projects which have occurred under Chapter 40B. Changes in Section 4.9.3 do not come from the court case. Rather, these reflect implementation issues the Planning Department and Planning Board have experienced. The changes will make the bylaw easier to administer and continue to meet the goals originally set forth in the bylaw. The changes address a few inequities, clarify various items, and remove duplication. The inequities. The bylaw restricts the ability to modify a structure to allow for accessory apartments. The problem with this is, in many cases, whether in a residential, commercial, or motel setting, properties have not utilized the density that zoning allows on the site. A house may not be at 15% lot coverage or might not have 2 stories. If they put in an accessory one-bedroom apartment, we might be stopping them from being able to upgrade the home. Commercial properties are allowed to be 2 stories. Most are 1 story. The current restriction acts to prohibit top-of-the-shop housing unless the property owner had the foresight to construct an upper area that may never have been used. And we have single-story motel properties which could better provide for housing if they were allowed to add a 2nd story. In addition, modifications to commercial and motel structures might also be able to add to the footprint under normal circumstances, but could find under the existing bylaw that they would be prohibited from doing this if they have chosen to provide some housing on the site as well. Affordable housing apartments have come in many shapes and sizes. These include the original project under the bylaw, the conversion of the Dennis West Motel into South Cape Apartments. More recently, the construction of a new shopping plaza on Route 134 included 8 one-bedroom apartments upstairs to the new commercial space. These apartments were leased before the first commercial tenant had even moved in. There have also been a number of single-unit conversions of existing space into apartments in buildings throughout Dennis. Finally, changes in Section 4.9.4 Affordable Housing Restrictions are being made to clarify who is responsible for recording the decisions at the Registry of Deeds. As you can see, the changes that are included here are all editorial type changes to the Affordable Housing Bylaw. All are important, and the Planning Board urges your approval of these changes at town meeting.